Yes, as Laurent said, we are covering 4 specificities: mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas, and coast, which is just about half the European territory, or around there, on about all types of themes. So we're covering everything in half of Europe. I'm not going to summarize this in 5 minutes. I will talk about governance. We said, how can this change, and why maybe do we think of these as primarily as governance issues? We said that some of us are struggling, others are succeeding, performing very well, but the issue is very much about governance. And I will try to update you on the current dialogue we have with cohesion policy actors. Why our findings show that using these categories could help to build better place-sensitive investment policies in these concerned areas, but also the challenge of getting this message through when we are talking about these categories, because we are applying other lines of reasoning than those that usually prevail in cohesion policy discussions. We refer very much to territorial sense of belonging of territorial policy actors. So very much FUs as they were presented yesterday by Simin Davoudi. What is the Commission? Obviously, the cohesion policy has been doing a lot in territories with geographic specificities, in terms of investments, in terms of bringing actors, performing the institutional setups. But this has not been a proactive policy of actually targeting these areas. The current position of the European Commission for the next programming period is quite the same. They have set up this notion of territorial strategies, which you can implement in relation within the context of cohesion policy programs, which is opening the door to all types of initiatives on these territories, for these territories. But there is no specific incentive, and in the past period we had more or less the same possibilities, and it didn't materialize to any large extent, because programs have quite enough to do with their business, their core business, and they will not add a layer of complexity unless they see a clear purpose. And this purpose is difficult to read in the types of indicators and measures that usually inform cohesion policy. TGS are interesting perspective precisely because they are not obvious functional areas. There is no labor market areas that could fit. You can say, of course, that an island or mountain valley are often functionally integrated. That may be, but the mountain range is not a valley, and many islands are functionally integrated with their mainland. So to address to the specific challenges and opportunities of territories with geographic specificities, we have to acknowledge that they are essentially social and cultural constructs. So they are concepts built to make sense of the world around us. And acknowledging them as such helps us to understand that even if they are not functional territories, TGS share many issues. For example, how do you organize a public service obligation for an island? It is a very concrete issue. It is very difficult to put it into figures because the challenge is not about travel times. It's quite complex often. How does the boat connect with the bus when you arrive at the mainland? How exactly is it organized in terms of timing? Do you get the transport in terms of seasonality that island actors need? All of these are very specific issues which you will not find in the general accessibility measures you see generally used in European statistics. Same thing then for designing smart service of general interest in sparsely populated areas. We have a lot of very concrete issues there of how to make service provision function when you have very few people. There again, very difficult to get pan-European data on this. So to actually get this knowledge through how this could be useful, we are really talking about how organizing exchanges of experience, dissemination of good practices could actually change the situation for these areas. So we're talking about bringing actors together. We're talking about federating at the European level these actors so that they can talk to, for example, the transport sector for public service obligation at the right level. You can federate all of these concerns of islands at the European level and actually get a meaningful dialogue with sector authorities. Concretely, for cohesion policy, at the different stages of cohesion policy, how could this make a difference? Well, I will talk about 4 stages of cohesion policy implementation. First, many programs right now are setting up socioeconomic analysis, preparing for the next programming period. When doing this, they can assess to a much more systematic degree whether specific vulnerabilities are taken into account. Islands refer to this as island proofing. Can you island-proof tourism development? You develop new tourism, but do you take into account the water resources or the pressures on local populations? What market failures occur? So you have specific market failures, for example, and once again on the provision of transport. They occur recurrently in many of these areas. Markets do not function in the same way. What occur? Well, how do you need maybe to think of territorial interventions in a different way? Because the causal effects are different. How can you draw on the European level? You have lots of European forums that exist, Euromontana, the CPMR Islands Commission, all of this develop a discourse. How can you actually use these forums to build a better cohesion policy? Also, how can you, in terms of organizing networks of regional policies, you have already a partnerships obviously for cohesion policy, but maybe you need to think of subgroups. Maybe within the regional partnerships for cohesion policy, the groups of mountaineers, the groups of insular population can provide inputs and help you build a better policy that is closer to the people. And finally, when considering the links between the different programs, as I mentioned, you could organize a multi-level territorial governance by actually bringing together island interests, mountain interests at the European level, organizing the dialogue, having some side of secretariats that bring this reflections forward and acknowledge that this is primarily a governance issue. You need to build up the capacity of these actors to think their own situation, to challenge prevailing discourses, and to build corresponding policies. So governance issue is the key. Building capacity is the key, and the European level can make a difference in these respects. Thank you.